I'll forget you in a week. Met someone better, she smirked on Christmas in front of her family, but when I took the ring back, she exploded hard fast. She looked me dead in the eye on Christmas Day, covered in grease from my challenger, and spat, "I'll forget you in a week." What she didn't know. I'd been planning my exit for 2 months already. Every insult she threw just dug her own hole deeper, because I had receipts for everything. That moment hung heavy in the air, the scent of expensive mulled wine suddenly acrid, Christmas lights twinkling mockingly around us. Her family sat frozen, a silent audience to the destruction. My name's Ethan. I'm 32, I fix heavy machinery, box 3 times a week, and I've been restoring my 1973 Dodge Challenger since I was 25. That car was about to save me in ways I never saw coming. Chloe and I had been together 3 years, engaged for 8 months. 2 years ago, if you'd asked, I would have sworn she was the one. She was funny, ambitious, she made me want to be better. My mom adored her, my buddies gave their approval, and I genuinely believed we were building something real. But somewhere between picking out wedding invitations and signing vendor contracts, she started changing. It was like watching a slow, painful transformation over 6 months into someone I just didn't recognize. And honestly, that hurt more than I ever let on. We'd agreed to split all wedding costs 50-50ths. Seemed fair enough, we both worked full-time. But every single invoice, the venue deposit, catering, photographer's retainer, somehow always ended up on my credit card. Chloe never had money available, even though she pulled in a decent income as a marketing coordinator. She lived like someone making double her salary, always fresh nails, new clothes, weekend brunches at places that charged $18 for avocado toast. But when it came time for her share of wedding expenses, suddenly she was broke. And could I just cover it? She'd pay me back next month. Next month never came. Every single time I brought it up, she'd twist it into an attack on me, telling me I was cheap or that I didn't truly love her if I was counting dollars. After months of that, I started feeling like I was going crazy, like maybe I was the problem. My best friend, Leo, who I've known since high school, documents everything like he's preparing for the apocalypse. He actually started keeping detailed records after the 3rd time I mentioned Chloe dodging a payment. By November, he'd calculated I'd covered about $11,000 in wedding expenses that were supposed to be joint. Plus, I was still paying 2/3 of our dates. Leo screenshots everything, saves email chains, photographs receipts, organizes them into color-coded folders. I used to joke he was paranoid, but that habit was about to save my future. The red flags got impossible to ignore in October. Chloe started being secretive with her phone, angling the screen away, taking calls in the other room. After 3 years together, you notice when behavior changes. I mentioned it to Leo over beers, and he quietly suggested I start keeping my own records, every expense, every conversation about money, every promise she made, just in case things went sideways. So, for 8 solid weeks leading up to Christmas, that's what I did. Documenting everything while acting completely normal on the surface. The Christmas dinner invitation came mid-December. Chloe insisted I had to be there because her mom wanted to discuss wedding details. I said, sure. Finished an early shift, spent 2 hours replacing my Challenger's front suspension because the old parts were shot, cleaned up, and headed to her parents' place around 3. The second I walked in, I knew something was wrong. The house looked perfect, a tree with expensive, matching ornaments, mulled wine simmering on the stove, holiday music, presents stacked neatly. But the people felt ice cold. Her mom barely looked at me. Her dad gave me this weird, tight smile. Her sister, Brooke, fidgeted with her phone. And Chloe was glued to her screen, typing away with this little smirk, like she was live-tweeting her own ambush. We sat down for dinner. For 20 painful minutes, everything was aggressively normal. Passing dishes, small talk about holiday shopping, her dad asking about work. But you could feel the tension building, thick in the air. Then Brooke mentioned honeymoon destinations, and Chloe's whole demeanor shifted. Attack mode. She launched into this speech about how I wasn't pulling my weight financially, how I cared more about that stupid car than our future, how she was tired of being with someone without ambition who spent every free hour in a garage covered in motor oil. Her family just nodded, like they'd all been briefed, like I was walking into a play where everyone knew their lines except me. Then Chloe stood up, raised her wine glass like she was making a toast, and declared she was done with a man who had no drive, that she didn't need someone who lived in a garage. And then she dropped the bomb about there being men out there who actually knew what they wanted from life. Men like Daniel. Brooke's face went white. Her dad's fork clattered loudly onto his plate. Her mom just stared blankly into her wine glass. That's when I realized her mom had known about the affair. But Brooke and her dad were hearing it for the first time, just like me. But Chloe wasn't done. She yanked off the engagement ring, the one I'd spent 2 months of overtime saving for, and threw it at me. It bounced off my chest and hit the floor with a metallic ping. She told me it was cheap, just like everything I did. Then she delivered what was supposed to be the killing blow. She looked right at me and said, "I'll forget you in a week." I've practically already forgotten you. On Christmas Day, in front of her family, she just nuked our 3-year relationship and announced she'd been cheating with some guy named Daniel. The wild part? I'd suspected something, but I hadn't known for sure until that exact moment. I stood up slowly. For about 5 seconds, I felt pure, burning rage. But then this weird calm washed over me. She'd just done exactly what Leo and I half expected. Gone nuclear. In front of witnesses. And handed me everything I needed. I bent down, picked up the ring. Pulled her spare key to my apartment from my pocket and set it on the table. Looked at her dad and said, "Thank you for having me. I'm sorry it had to end this way." Then I walked out while Chloe started yelling something I didn't even listen to. I sat in my truck for 10 seconds, texted Leo, "It happened." She went full nuclear. Starting protocol now. Then I drove to his place while my phone exploded with texts from Chloe. They went from angry to confused to panicked in 15 minutes flat. Leo opened his door, took one look at my face, and just said, "She actually did it." I nodded, and he grabbed his laptop, because we both knew what came next. See, I'd spent 8 weeks preparing for exactly this. Not because I wanted it to end, but because I'd started recognizing the financial manipulation and emotional gaslighting that Leo helped me document. Every time I'd bring up the lopsided expenses, she'd attack my character. And after months of that, I felt like I was losing my mind. But Leo convinced me to save everything, screenshots, bank statements, emails, even voice memos, just in case things imploded and I needed proof I wasn't insane. That night, sitting in Leo's apartment while he pulled up folders of meticulously organized evidence, I felt this strange, profound calm. For the first time in months, I wasn't confused or second-guessing myself. I could see the whole pattern in black and white. And I knew exactly what came next. The morning after Christmas, I woke up on Leo's couch to 23 missed calls from Chloe and about 50 texts. They started apologetic at midnight, turned accusatory by 3 a.m., and devolved into incoherent rambling by dawn. The first thing I did was change every lock on my apartment. She'd had that spare key for 6 months. Leo was already up, sitting at his kitchen table with his laptop and 3 colored highlighters, lined up like surgical instruments. He looked up with grim satisfaction and said, "We have everything needed to dismantle her narrative." The plan was straightforward but thorough. Block Chloe everywhere. Update emergency contacts at work and insurance to remove her. Systematically cancel wedding vendors. And, most critically, conduct a full financial audit of every dollar I'd spent that was supposed to be split 50/50ths. Leo had built this detailed spreadsheet, breaking down every wedding expense by vendor, date, amount, and who was contractually obligated to pay what. Seeing 3 years of imbalance laid out like that was genuinely shocking. I'd been paying in chunks and hadn't registered just how lopsided it had become. The venue deposit alone was $4,500, entirely from my account. Catering was $3,200. Photographer, $1,500. Plus probably 15 smaller expenses, adding up way past my fair share. I started making calls that afternoon. And here's something useful most people don't know: many wedding vendors have reasonable cancellation policies if you're outside certain time windows. Since our wedding wasn't until early June, and this was December, I was in the refund zone. The venue gave back $3,000 of the $4,500. The caterer refunded $2,400 of $3,200. The photographer kept his retainer, per contract. I recovered about $4,350 total. Then, 2 weeks after Christmas, just when I thought the refund process was done, the venue coordinator called, sounding uncomfortable. Apparently, Chloe had contacted them, claiming I'd stolen her identity to cancel, that she never agreed, and they'd frozen my refund pending investigation. I sat staring at my phone, processing that she was actively sabotaging my ability to recover money I'd already paid. That's when I realized this wasn't going to be a clean break. This was war. Leo showed up within 20 minutes. We spent 3 hours documenting that every payment came from my accounts, with my signatures, including emails proving I'd been the only one communicating with them. We drove to the venue next morning, walked them through the evidence, and they unfroze the refund within an hour. But the whole thing showed me Chloe wasn't moving on. She was burning everything down on her way out. The engagement ring was trickier since you can't return custom jewelry. But I'd worked with the jeweler, David, years back, and he bought it back at 60%, putting another chunk in my pocket. As Leo and I went through shared expenses with forensic detail, we discovered Chloe had racked up $1,247 in charges that were supposed to be joint, where she committed to paying half but never did. The engagement party where she insisted on expensive wine, a venue tour weekend where she upgraded our hotel without asking, and other instances where she made decisions costing money, then developed amnesia about reimbursing me. Leo suggested small claims court. I hesitated because part of me just wanted to be done, to put it all behind me. But then I remembered her blocking my venue refund and realized she wouldn't let this end quietly. We built what Leo called the evidence Bible. Bank statements, text screenshots with promises to repay, ignored Venmo requests, detailed expense breakdowns, all organized with tabs and a table of contents. It was probably overkill, but Leo doesn't do anything halfway. The filing fee was $35. Court date scheduled for early March. Meanwhile, Chloe's behavior escalated from annoying to genuinely concerning. The apologetic Christmas texts vanished by the 27th, replaced by accusations I'd humiliated her. By New Year's, she was sending long messages about how I'd ruined her life. Her family was disappointed. Her sister wouldn't talk to her. And somehow, this was my fault for not fighting for our relationship after she'd announced her affair. She called from different numbers after I blocked her. Showed up at my gym twice until staff banned her. Drove past my apartment enough that my neighbor mentioned seeing her car. Tried getting into my workplace claiming she needed to drop something off. I documented everything. Screenshots, call logs, appearance dates and times, witness statements. After the 5th incident, I called police non-emergency asking about creating an official harassment record. The officer was helpful, said my documentation was solid, and if behavior escalated, I'd have enough for a protective order. Mid-January, Leo showed up with something big. Using social media forensics, he discovered Chloe's affair wasn't recent. It had been going on 8 months, basically since we got engaged in April. Worse, Leo found statements showing hotel rooms and weekend trips she'd claimed were work conferences or girls' weekends, all charged to our joint wedding expense account. She'd been funding her affair with money supposed to build our future. When Leo showed me those highlighted charges, I felt sick to my stomach. There was Asheville in May, she'd called it a marketing conference. A beach hotel in August, supposedly a bachelorette party. A downtown hotel in September, she claimed was a late client dinner. All on our wedding card. I sat staring at those charges, and that was the closest I came to losing it completely. The financial manipulation was one thing, but this felt like calculated betrayal on an entirely different level. Leo asked if I was okay, and I couldn't answer for a minute. Then I spent 4 hours in my garage, replacing the Challenger's brake lines. I needed something with clear steps, with measurable progress. By midnight, I was back to cold and focused. But something had shifted. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was going to make sure there was a complete accounting. Daniel turned out to be a mid-level sales manager, married with 2 kids, with zero intention of leaving his wife despite whatever he'd promised Chloe. Leo found Daniel's wife's public Facebook showing a normal suburban family, soccer games, birthdays. And from Chloe's increasingly unhinged social media posts, we could tell she was just realizing Daniel had used her and was never leaving his marriage. She'd blown up everything for a guy who'd been lying the whole time. Watching that realization hit her through angry posts about men being trash was almost satisfying, in a dark kind of way. Around this time, my relationship with Sarah shifted into something more. She'd worked at Max's Auto Parts for years. We chatted casually dozens of times, but it was just friendly shop talk. I came in for seat brackets, and she mentioned restoring a 1969 Camaro SS. We talked for 45 minutes about suspension geometry and brake conversions, and I realized I was having the first genuinely relaxed conversation in months, where I wasn't calculating who owed what or wondering if I was being manipulated. We grabbed coffee, and I talked for 45 minutes straight about vendor contracts and court preparation. Yeah, I probably killed any second meetup right then and there. But Sarah said she'd been through her own messy breakup where her ex tried claiming he'd paid for things she'd actually paid for, so she got it. She was straightforward, calm, knew her stuff, paid for her own coffee. Being around her felt like the exact opposite of Chloe's exhausting chaos. We started meeting at car shows. Then she helped install seats in the Challenger. While neither of us was rushing into anything, I recognized this was what healthy looked like. Someone who showed up when they said they would, paid their own way, didn't need drama to feel alive. Chloe found out somehow, and that's when things got truly wild. There's this indoor go-kart place called Velocity Track we hit monthly. One Friday in late January, we were there for someone's birthday when Chloe showed up uninvited, clearly drunk. She stormed into the lobby, screaming about how I'd cheated and destroyed her life. She pointed at Sarah, calling her names I won't repeat, telling everyone I'd been seeing someone behind her back, completely rewriting history. Sarah looked confused, having only known me 2 weeks, and I was about to de-escalate when Chloe grabbed someone's helmet and threw it at the wall hard enough to crack the visor. The manager called the cops. They issued a formal trespass warning, banning her permanently, and I added everything to the evidence Bible. My phone buzzed with more messages that night, but I just screenshotted them and went back to talking carburetors with Sarah while Chloe's life spiraled somewhere outside my concern. The small claims court date landed on a Tuesday morning in early March. One of those gray, late winter days where you can see your breath in the parking lot. I showed up 45 minutes early with Leo, who was carrying a briefcase that looked like it belonged to a corporate lawyer, even though we were arguing over $1,200. Chloe rolled in 10 minutes late, wearing her job interview outfit, looking tired with dark circles makeup couldn't hide, carrying just a purse but zero documentation. When we got called in, she kept trying to make eye contact, like that would change the outcome. The judge was a woman probably in her 60s who looked like she'd seen every relationship drama variation possible and had zero patience for nonsense. She started by asking Chloe if she had evidence disputing my claim that she owed money for shared expenses she'd agreed to split. Chloe launched into this rambling story about how the relationship was complicated, and I'd always made more money, so it wasn't fair to expect equal payment when she knew I was struggling. She completely ignored that she'd been living above her means and her struggles hadn't stopped weekly manicures or expensive restaurant meals. The judge cut her off mid-sentence with this look of profound weariness. She asked if Chloe had any bank statements, text messages, or receipts showing she'd paid her share. And when Chloe admitted she didn't bring proof because she didn't think she'd need documentation for what was obviously unfair, I watched the judge's expression shift from neutral to completely done. Leo and I presented the evidence Bible, about 40 pages organized with tabs and highlights and a table of contents that was probably overkill, but again, Leo doesn't do anything halfway. The judge flipped through for maybe 3 minutes, occasionally nodding, then looked up and ruled Chloe owed me $1,325, including the original amount plus court fees, payable within 30 days or subject to wage garnishment. Chloe's face went white. She started to stand up to argue, but the judge just said, "Next case." And that was it. 3 months of drama resolved in 8 minutes of court time. We walked out into the gray morning, and Leo did this little victory fist pump, while I felt mostly just tired, ready to stop thinking about Chloe and actually move forward instead of just surviving her chaos. I genuinely thought that would be the end. That losing in court would finally make her realize she needed to move on. But apparently, humiliation is a catalyst for some people rather than a stopping point. The next 3 weeks were relatively quiet, in a way that felt ominous, like the calm before a storm you know is coming but can't see. She paid the judgment in 2 installments right before the deadline. Her social media went completely dark. Mutual friends said she'd moved back with her parents, and I started relaxing, thinking maybe this was actually over. Sarah and I had been spending more time together, working on the Challenger seats I'd bought with refund money. And things felt genuinely good for the first time in years. Like I was building something real instead of surviving someone else's chaos. Then came the night of March 20th. I remember it specifically because it was the first genuinely warm evening of early spring, that magical night where winter finally breaks. Sarah and I had decided to work late in my garage with the door open, installing the new upholstery we'd spent weeks picking out. It was around 10:30, and we were debating seatbelt mount routing when I heard a car pull up way too fast outside, tires screeching slightly. Before I could process what was happening, Chloe came stumbling into my garage wearing pajama pants and an oversized jacket, holding what was clearly a wine bottle. Absolutely hammered to the point she could barely walk straight, she immediately started screaming at a volume that probably woke half my neighborhood. She went off about how I'd destroyed her entire life, turned her family against her, poisoned all her friends, made everyone think she was the bad guy when all she'd done was fall in love with someone else. How Daniel had blocked her, and his wife threatened her with a restraining order, and she lost him because of me, somehow. How she lost apartment deposits because the landlord found her background check showing the go-kart trespass. And somehow, in her mind, all this destruction was my fault for not being man enough to forgive her mistakes and fight for what we had. Sarah just stood there, holding a socket wrench, looking completely baffled. I pulled out my phone and called 911, explaining calmly that my ex-fiancé had entered my property without permission, was clearly intoxicated, and I needed officers to respond. Chloe kept yelling about how she deserved better, how Sarah was just some cheap rebound who couldn't compare to what we'd had, how I should have fought for our relationship instead of giving up easily. Completely oblivious to the irony after she'd thrown a ring at me on Christmas and announced her 8-month affair to her family. The cops showed up within 8 minutes, which felt like hours, while Chloe stumbled around my garage, getting dangerously close to the Challenger, making me worried she'd damage it. The responding officers handled it perfectly. They asked Chloe to step outside in a tone that left zero room for argument, performed a field sobriety test in my driveway that she failed spectacularly, checked their system, and found all previous harassment reports, plus the go-kart trespass. Then they arrested her for criminal trespass, public intoxication, and violating conditions of her previous warning. She kept screaming my name as they put her in the patrol car, handcuffs behind her back, saying I'd regret this, and she'd never let me forget her, and I'd ruined both our lives, and a bunch of slurred, incoherent stuff that probably didn't help her case. Then they drove away with lights on, and the street got quiet again, except for crickets and distant highway traffic. Sarah looked at me, half concerned and half bewildered, and asked if that happened often. I told her, no, this was actually the grand finale, the final meltdown I'd been halfway expecting for weeks. We went back inside and finished bolting down the passenger seat while I gave her the extremely abbreviated version of the past 4 months. We took the Challenger out for a test drive around midnight, just cruising through empty streets with the windows down and the engine rumbling with that deep muscle car sound that never gets old. And I realized Chloe had been wrong about pretty much everything, but especially one thing. She'd said she'd forget me in a week, that she'd practically already forgotten me, standing in her parents' living room on Christmas with that smirk like she'd already won. But here we were almost 3 months later, and she was the one who couldn't let go, who destroyed her own life trying to prove some point that didn't even make sense, who'd given up something stable for something temporary, then blamed everyone else when it fell apart. I never forgot her either, but not in the way she'd meant it as some threat. I remembered her as a lesson about red flags and financial boundaries and the importance of having friends like Leo who document everything and tell you the truth even when it's uncomfortable. The Challenger ran like a dream with the new seats, comfortable as hell. Sarah and I grabbed breakfast at some 24-hour diner and talked about upgrading the brake system. And somewhere across town, Chloe was dealing with the consequences of her own choices, which honestly had nothing to do with me anymore. She'd wanted to be unforgettable, wanted to be the one who walked away and moved on to something better. But instead, she became exactly what she'd accused me of being, forgettable, irrelevant, and stuck in the past while everyone else moved forward. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to meticulously document everything just to prove you weren't crazy?